Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Camille, and this space has been specially curated to help you dig deeper into the Word of God. And y'all, I'm not talking about that fluffy, surface level study. I'm talking about deep, soul stirring Bible study. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, then stick around and maybe consider subscribing. Welcome back. Today we are jumping into the Book of Esther. If you're just joining us for this study, I did in my previous video go over the historical context and background. All of that information is very important to understand before getting into today's video. Okay, so if you haven't already watched that one, go back and check it out. It's not super long. Today we're diving into Esther chapter 1. And as I was studying Esther chapter 1, I ran into some more information that you might want to add to your historical background and context page. So we'll go over that as we dive in. In verse 1, it says, "These events took place during the days of Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes the First, who ruled 127 provinces from India to Kush. In those days, King Ahasuerus reigned from his royal throne in the fortress at Susa." So, um, Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes the First, in my notes, I think I am mainly referring to him as King Xerxes. And King Xerxes, he ruled for 21 years over the Persian Empire. Major cities of the Persian Empire include Susa, Persepolis, and Ecbatana. Okay, and Susa held King Xerxes' winter palace. So that's where they are. They're at his winter home. Okay. And continuing on into verse 3, it says, "He held a feast in the third year of his reign for all of his officials and staff, the army of Persia and Media, the nobles and the officials from the provinces." So this is the first banquet slash feast that's mentioned in the book of Esther. There are many. So as we go through this study, I'm going to be taking note of who was there and what their intended purpose was, or anything that stands out about it. So for this particular banquet, number one, um, this was for the nobility in the military, and it lasted 180 days. It says that he displayed the glorious wealth of his kingdom and the magnificent splendor of his greatness for a total of 180 years. Okay. Then going into verse number 5, it says, "At the end of this time, the king held a week-long banquet in the garden court of the royal palace for all of the people, from the greatest to the least, who were present in the fortress of Susa." So here we go again with feast number 2. This one is for the people in Susa. It says from the greatest to the least, okay? And this lasted 7 days. Now I do want to pause here for a second because I did take some additional notes on my little notepad, and this is just a Dollar Tree notepad. I am gonna, when I'm done filling it out, I'm gonna take this off and tip it into my Bible page. But it says, um, King Xerxes I ruled from 486 to 465 BC. The first Medo-Persian king was Cyrus the Great, and he had already issued a decree in 539 BC, which allowed the Jews to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple. We talked about this last time. By the time Xerxes I came into power, many Jews had returned to Jerusalem, but many others did not, like Esther and her uncle Mordecai, who are our main characters here in the book of Esther. Also of note is that other historical accounts speculate that this specific time in scripture correlates with Xerxes preparing to invade Greece. Okay, so feast number 1 might have included war planning. All right, hold on to that. We'll come back to that in a second. Verses 6 through 7 go on to describe the splendor and the greatness, the luxury of feast number 2. It says, "White and blue linen hangings were fastened with fine white and purple linen cords to silver rods on marble columns. Gold and silver couches were arranged on a mosaic pavement of red feldspar. marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Okay, so he's sparing no expense for these feasts. And on top of that, y'all, verse 7 says that drinks were served in an array of gold goblets, each with a different design. Royal wine flowed freely according to the king's bounty. The drinking was according to the royal decree, so a law for this feast that said there are no restrictions. And the king had ordered every wine steward in his household to serve whatever each person wanted. Hmm. So again, he spared no expense. This is feast number 2. It came coming right off of the heels of feast number 1. He's showing off his great wealth, his splendor, all of those things. And in verse 9, we find out that Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women of King Xerxes' palace. So this is feast number 3, hosted by Queen Vashti for the women. Okay, they have their own separate little shindig going on. And then in verse 10, it says, on the 7th day of that 7-day feast, when the king was feeling good from the wine, King Xerxes commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who personally served him, to bring Queen Vashti before him with her royal crown. He wanted to show off her beauty to the people and the officials because she was very beautiful. Okay, so he calls down his wife. He sends his eunuchs. Now, who were the eunuchs? I'm probably going to have to do some more research on this. I'm going to be honest with y'all. But the eunuchs, um, they were powerful and they were trusted. Eunuchs were castrated, and so they were trusted around the women um, because there would be no source of temptation. It was also a show of how they would not rebel and try and rise to power. So they're important to the king. And he sent them to go get Queen Vashti, and because he wants to show off her beauty. Okay, you can only imagine after unlimited drinks, being complimented, and you know, being bragged, or not being bragged, but bragging on yourself for the past how many days, how full of yourself you must feel at this point. And now you want your wife to come down to just show her off because she's pretty. But it says in verse 12, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command that was delivered by his eunuchs. And the king became furious, and his anger burned within him. Vashti refused, and this made the king angry. We don't know necessarily why Vashti didn't come, but I did take some additional notes. And again, if this account right here of the feast, if this coincides with historical events, then Xerxes the First was preparing for war with Greece. Xerxes, who needed his soldiers to obey his commands, couldn't get his own wife to obey him in his own palace. And this could be a possible reason for his anger. His pride is hurt. He's feeling, questioned. So he's very angry, y'all, to the point of where he's consulting with his wise men. Verse 13 says, the king consulted the wise men who understood the times, for it was normal procedure to confer with experts in law and justice. So this was not just a marital dispute, but a legal matter. Okay, she disobeyed the king publicly, and therefore something had to be done about that. The verse 14, the most trusted ones were Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marcina, and Memucan. They were the 7 officials of Persia and Media who had personal access to the king and occupied the highest positions in the kingdom. The king asked, according to the law, what should be done with Queen Vashti, since she refused to obey King Xerxes' command that was delivered by the eunuchs. Verse 16, Memucan said in the presence of the king and his officials, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but all of the officials and the peoples who are in every one of King Ahasuerus' provinces. For the queen's actions will become public knowledge to all the women and cause them to despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes ordered Queen Vashti brought before him, but she did not come. Before this day is over, the noble women of Persia and Media who hear about the queen's act will say the same thing to all the king's officials, resulting in more contempt and fury. So basically, they want to make an example. This wise man, his advisor, if you will, is telling him, make an example out of the queen so that no other wives in the land will become disobedient to their husbands. Okay? Cut off the source before it spreads. That's basically what they're saying. And so, verse 19 says, if it meets the king's approval, he should personally issue a decree. Let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes so that it cannot be revoked. Vashti is not to enter King Xerxes' presence, and her royal position is to be given to another woman who is more worthy than she. So, making it a royal decree means that it cannot be disputed and it cannot be revoked. So, at this point, Vashti is deposed, and this is going to set the stage for Esther to arrive. The decree the king issues will be heard throughout his vast kingdom, so all women will honor their husbands from the greatest to the least. The king and his counselors approved the proposal, and he followed Memucan's advice. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each ethnic group in its own language, that every man should be master of his own house and speak in the language of his own people. Okay, so there's no confusion here. He was publicly embarrassed. A royal decree was issued, and Queen Vashti was removed from her place as queen and never allowed to be in his sight again. Okay. And he wants it to be known across the land that men are in control of their homes. And so he sends the message out. No matter what your ethnicity is, what language you speak, he made sure that you got the message. Very important. One of my resources says that chapter 1 sort of sets the scene so that we can understand everything else that comes next. We know that King Xerxes was married. He had these feasts to show off his greatness and his splendor. And he was embarrassed by his wife in front of everybody at the party. And because of that, he issued this decree to get her under control. Okay. And it got sent out to all of the land, and he no longer has a queen. And so this is going to open up the doors for Miss Esther. Now, I do this at the end of reading each chapter, just sort of summarizing what happened. Because with these historical books of the Bible, it's important to understand this story, okay? We have to know what's going on. Sometimes the details can get lost, and it's just a great way to test my comprehension of what I just read and studied. So, what I'll do is after I finish studying, I will go in and I will just do a little summary from my memory, what I remember everything, how I remember everything taking place. And again, that just seals it in my mind so that I know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to share that summary in today's video because I do encourage you guys to go and recap it for yourselves. But when we get to Esther 2, I will sort of briefly go over that just so we can remember what we were studying and reading before we get into what Esther 2 has to offer. But this is everything that I studied on Esther chapter 1. Again, setting the tone, setting the stage for everything that's getting ready to come up and throughout the rest of the book of Esther. Just like last week, I'm going to include additional information, some journal prompts, all of that on my Substack related to what we learned in Esther chapter 1. So if you want even more study, go check out my Substack. It's sort of like our hub for Bible study materials, the written materials and the journal prompts and things as such. So I will leave my Substack linked below, and that'll be available for you guys after this video goes up. Leave your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss out on our Bible studies. And I pray this study met you where you needed it. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.